Hi, everybody out there. We're so excited that you're taking time out of your day to come and join us. My name is Silvia, and I'm a litigation attorney over in Detroit, Michigan. And with me, we've got Dan Elliott, who's the Director of Innovation over at the ABA YLD, Chase Hertel, who's the Deputy Director and Counsel over at the ABA Center of Innovation, and Laura Kubit, who's an attorney over at the Legal Services of Eastern Michigan. Now, throughout this webinar, we want you to take advantage of the chat and the Q&A functions. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please shoot them out as we go. We can address them when they come in or perhaps wait for the Q&A. And also, if you've got any resources or any discussion points that you want to share, again, please take advantage of everything. Now, as many of you probably were, at the beginning of this year, we were all excited for 2020, right? But then as soon as March kind of came along, the world threw us a curveball. So everything started changing, right? We were told not to go out to restaurants, not to go out and eat, not to go out to work, not to visit our parents. We were told to stay at home. And included in this was the fact that we were asked, or at least a lot of us were, to work remotely. Remote working, something that was foreign to a lot of us prior to COVID. So a lot of law firms started scrambling and setting up new infrastructure and investing in new software overnight. Zoom subscriptions shot up overnight and within a few weeks. Now, clients got anxious, but some of us with perhaps a little bit more innovative mindset, we kind of chuckled, right? And we were kind of like in that I told you so mentality. So we began to wonder, was this the push that our industry needed? Was this innovation out of necessity, right? So here with this conversation, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that innovation has looked like lately, and what some of the hurdles have been, and more importantly, how to keep the momentum going long after COVID. Before we get too far, we do have a couple of polls for you. Nope, somebody told me that they can't hear me. If anybody else is having trouble hearing me, please do let me know, okay? But so we do have a couple of polls for you. First off, we want to know what technology tools, if any, did you or your firm or organization use before COVID? And choose all that apply. All right, what do we have here? So it looks like a lot of people were using cloud storage technology, video communication technology, and remote file access and practice management comes in next, and then some other ones. If you have any other tools and technology that you're using, please do let us know in the chat function. Now, what tech tools are you using now that you didn't use prior to COVID? And again, you can click all that apply. All right, what do we have here? Okay, so some of you, about 24% say nothing new, but about 60% of people do say that you've implemented more video communication tools into your work. So that's a little bit interesting because one person that I know who was amazing at using a lot of these technology tools that we just talked about prior to COVID is one of our panelists, Laura Kubit. She's one of the attorneys that had to innovate out of necessity way before most others and way before COVID. Laura, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm going to just share my experience with you all today. And, we all have a lot of very different experiences. So I am a civil legal aid attorney, and I was grateful to come into a system in Michigan that had a lot of innovation already built in. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and what my work as a civil legal aid attorney was like pre-COVID and then what it's like now, and I'll show you some of the equipment that I'm using and my home office. So when I started out as a legal aid attorney, I was actually still a law student. I got a fellowship after my first year working at our statewide legal aid hotline. And that hotline basically normally has about 25 attorneys working at any given time in one big room, and it served people from all over the state. And so that was one form of using technology to innovate to serve the legal needs of the people that we were serving. So the reason for the hotline is because Michigan is pretty large and there was so much unmet legal needs. So as an example, in 2018, there were 2 million people that were eligible for legal aid, meaning that they were below 125% of the poverty line. Now, I know the 2020 numbers, so 25% of the poverty line in 2020 for a single person is $15,950, so not a lot of money. So in 2018, there were 2 million people in Michigan that met that level, that qualified for free legal assistance. And they were all over, and there's only so many legal aid attorneys for every 6,459 people in Michigan that qualify for legal aid. There's only one civil legal aid attorney to serve them. So there's this massive need and only a few people. So the hotline was great because people could call in and talk to an attorney. They'd have to wait on hold maybe 20 minutes, and then they would have an actual attorney to triage what their problem was and give them advice right there on the phone. And then that hotline attorney was also doing essentially the intake for the local legal aid attorney. So they would take very detailed notes, kind of get the initial ball rolling, and if it's something that they thought this person has a defense, this person needs an attorney, this person can't handle it on their own, that hotline attorney would then refer it to the local attorney, and then the local attorney could take all of those notes and pick up where that hotline attorney left off. So it saved the local attorney a lot of time, and it was a really innovative system. Another innovation that I walked into as a new attorney is that Michigan has a great civil legal aid website. It's called michiganlegalhelp.org. And I know many states have similar websites that have automated forms. You answer a bunch of questions and it essentially spits out the forms at the end that you could file in court. There's videos and a lot of Q&A written in plain English that people can easily understand. So those were two huge innovations that I had nothing to do with creating and were awesome. So I was down in the Metro Detroit area working with the hotline as a law student, and then later on I got a litigation job as a legal aid attorney up in Cairo, Michigan. Cairo, Michigan is in the thumb, so everybody in Michigan uses their hand. And so I was located right in the middle of the thumb in a town that has a population of about 4,000 people, and I was serving 11 counties basically in mid-Michigan, and I was serving seniors. So 11 counties, I mean, that was huge. And I'm working out of this really remote office, and I had a part-time assistant who was basically a senior who was in a job training program. And when I walked in, nobody had been in my position for over a month, and the assistant had, the system that I walked into there was a relationship with the local commissions on aging in each of the counties that I serve. So each county has a senior center. You might be familiar with that. And so they would have once a month at each of the senior centers, there would be appointments where the attorney who was in the position that I was now in would meet with people. And so since nobody had been there for a month, they were kind of booked solid for the next coming month. And the system that I walked into was basically just somebody's name and an appointment time saying that they had legal problems or legal questions. And so there was basically no systems in place. And my lovely assistant, who was a senior herself, who really didn't have much training or background, she wasn't a paralegal, we had to figure it out on our own without a whole lot of guidance. And so that's what I walked into in serving this massive service area with clienteles who were seniors in a mostly rural area where, it would take me 3 hours to go from one end of the service area to the other. Also, none of my county courts had e-filing, and most of the senior centers that I went to didn't have any kind of Wi-Fi, let alone secure Wi-Fi or anything like that. So I just used the tools that I was used to using and the systems that we did have to just get the work done that I could. So as a legal aid attorney, we did have a case management system. It's very different than I think any of you use. Many of you might use Clio or your own. But so I had a case management system that I could access from the internet, and it was secure. And then I guess I've gone through a couple different systems, but I've used Office 365, and now I also use business Gmail, G Suite. So I was able to just take my laptop and actually, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide, Tracy? I'll show you kind of the tools that I was using pre-COVID when I was going to these senior centers to serve seniors in my massive service area. So I'm using my laptop, I'm using a remote scanner, and it's a ScanSnap. It was actually a gift several years ago, and I used it nearly every single day. And then I eventually got over in the right-hand corner a portable printer that's an Epson Workforce. And so that's what I used. I used my cell phone, and at the time I didn't have a voice over IP app, but I just would block my number using, I think, *67, and I would just call people that I needed to call. I had a hotspot, I had my portable scanner, I had my portable printer. I could access my case management system just via a website. And within that case management system, I could have my client files. And then I just would carry around other tools that I needed, like paper, stamps, envelopes, and then commonly used forms like retainers and you know, whatever I needed for the particular client meeting. And also I'm a notary. I was doing a lot of estate planning documents for seniors because that's what seniors identify as a legal need. There's actually studies that show that people are pretty bad about identifying their own legal needs, but that's something that they know. I need a will, I need powers of attorney, maybe a ladybird deed. I don't know how many of your jurisdictions have that, but so I did a lot of notarization. So I also needed to know, I'm gonna need some witnesses. Where can I get witnesses? Usually I could get them from the senior center. Sometimes people had even more mobility issues, so I had to go to them in their home. Sometimes I had to meet them at a library. Sometimes we had to go and have something witnessed or notarized at a local bank branch. You know, I learned what all the closing times were of all the local post offices. Oddly, in Harrison, Michigan, several years ago, it closed at 4:36 p.m. Who knew? You know, and then the Saginaw post office stays open till 6:30. So if you need to get something postmarked that day, and you need to drive, you do what you need to do. So anyway, I used G Suite actually initially, and I was using the calendar to set individual appointments and then the client's phone number as well, and a little bit of description about what their case was. And so, you know, if I was running late from one place to another, I could quickly call somebody and tell them, oh, I'm running late, or I had to reschedule. And the calendar was huge. And anytime I met with someone, I always scheduled what the next thing was. I'm using screenshots of my phone, the time on my phone, so that I'm keeping track of my time on the go. So that way I remember when I transition from one thing to another. And really, I would just try and maximize my appointments. You know, if I'm driving 2.5 hours away to Clare County, Michigan, this one time per month, I'm going to get as much done in Clare County, Michigan that day as I possibly can. So, you know, it was a long drive for me to get out there, but then I would have back-to-back appointments from 9 a.m. to they kicked me out at 4:30 p.m. And, you know, then if I maybe had to stop at a nursing home and see somebody else, I would do that. And so they would be long days too. But, you know, I just tried to minimize the travel. So those were some of the tools that I was using, and, you know, it worked out pretty well. So I was basically, you know, when you're talking about innovation, and Chase will go into this too, you've got really 3 big prongs. You've got your people, you know, your stakeholders and who you're serving, and kind of the people that are part of your team. You've got the processes that you're using, and then you've also got the tools that you're using. So I was just going over the technology tools that I was using. And you really have to think very carefully about all 3. And in a way, I was kind of lucky that I'm in this remote legal aid outpost. And I should say I was the only attorney and my part-time assistant. And so there was just, it was like a blank slate. There was so much room for innovation. I wasn't stuck with this, you know, really rigid hierarchy and these really rigid processes. So that was exciting. And so I had the freedom to kind of figure some stuff out and just get the job done. And, you know, I was able to, maybe as a quick example on like a specific case, I was able to take referrals from that hotline that I mentioned earlier and quickly just deal with the issue. So as an example, I remember I got a referral that was urgent when I was on my way back from one of the out counties, and the person was going, it was a collection issue, and she was going to get a default judgment the very next day unless something happened. So her home was on my way. She didn't have any transportation. So I stopped at her home, you know, I gave her a call. I reviewed the notes through the internet on my phone. And then I gave her a call, said, do you mind if I stop by? That's fine. I stopped by and verified that she was uncollectible. She was only on SSI. She didn't own her home. She didn't own a vehicle. You know, she was uncollectible. So even if she had a default judgment, they couldn't collect from this credit card debt, which frankly, she wasn't even sure was valid. So I was able to write out a quick affidavit and show proof of her social security statement. She was able to dig that out from her paperwork. And then I was able to notarize it. I scanned that using my portable scanner. And then I was able to email it to my assistant, several counties over. And then she was able to fax it to the opposing counsel. They required fax, otherwise I would have emailed it directly. And then I was able to speak with the other side, and they reviewed it, and that's all they needed. And then they said that, you know, they agree she's uncollectible and we're going to deem this as a hardship. And so they agreed to dismiss the case. So she didn't have a judgment on her record, and it removed that stress. So that was just something that I was able to jump on really quickly. And because I was mobile and because I had these tools, I was able to do that.
Laura,
Yeah, go
I'm going to interject just a little bit. Have you made any changes since, a few months ago, or have you been able to transition everything smoothly?
Yeah, thanks. And I know that, sorry, I guess I'm a little excited, and we need to have time for all of our speakers. You know, really, the biggest change is that I'm not actually just seeing my clients, but a lot of the same tools and technology still applies. All those tools that I was using out at the senior center, I'm now using in my home. So it's the same stuff, it's just that I'm not driving around and I'm just talking to the clients more and more over the phone, which frankly has been easier than I thought. You know, a lot of my clients they're seniors, they're very vulnerable, and I told myself, no, we really have to have these in-person meetings, but really my clients were able to do a lot on the phone, just like when I was at the hotline, that was all over the phone, no clients ever went into that office. So I would say one of the biggest changes is that we were super lucky in our organization that right before the shutdown, we had switched our phone system because we had a super antiquated phone system that was really clunky, and we switched over to Ring Central. So over on the screen, I have kind of a little image of that. And so that's a voice over IP system. So it integrates your desk phone with, you have sort of a dashboard that you can log onto on your computer. And then you also have an app on your phone. So I'm able to take calls to my work number on my cell phone like I'm sitting at my desk. So that has been huge. And also that whole system, it gives me voicemail to email, which is huge. I didn't have any of that. So, I can be out taking a walk at lunch and I see that important call from the opposing counsel coming back, and I can pick it up and take it, which is really great. Another huge difference post-COVID is just with the courts. So I said that we didn't have e-filing before, and now, courts are just figuring it out. So I'm able to, I don't have to drive 3 counties over with my wet signature. I can just email the clerk whatever the filing is, and she accepts it, which is great. So, and, of course, we're doing Zoom hearings. And something that's really difficult, I'll say, is just I'm in a super high-risk clientele. So I want to do everything I can to keep my clients safe. I have a number of clients in nursing homes. I got a frantic call, maybe 2 months ago from my client who said they just came in and told her that her roommate had COVID. And then the next day on the news, she heard that 17 people in her nursing home had died. So pretty terrifying stuff. But anyway, as far as going back to the technology, I think that's just sort of a quick overview of the technology that I have used in the past and now. And I guess I'd kind of like to just quickly show you on my screen what I have set up. If Tracy, you can let me kind of give you a little tour. So I have just my printer that's in my house with my modem. So that's down there next to the French horn that I never play anymore. And then, okay, so I have my desk over here. So I've got my work laptop, my scanner, and then I did get a new all-in-one printer. I guess that's another change. So my organization decided that they were gonna buy me this HP OfficeJet 250 all-in-one. And so it's apparently a scanner and a copier and a printer. And then I also have my, oh, can you even see it? Yeah, my shredder. So the shredder is pretty important. So, and the scanner is a ScanSnap S1300i. And then this is the all-in-one printer that my organization finally just bought me. So yeah, there's a little more buy-in. And I guess the last big thing is just flexibility on time, and not the higher ups aren't so insistent that I be in the brick and mortar space, which really allows me a ton of freedom to just get done the job that I need to get done.
Nice.
So that's my story. Thanks so much, and I'll turn it back over to Silvia.
Nice, thank you, Laura. So now I've got to insert a little bit of a shout out here to my alma mater, Michigan State University College of Law, because when I was there, they provided us with a lot of more innovative and legal tech oriented courses that Chase here can even attest to. But one thing that I remember learning, taking advantage of, cloud storage, mobile offices, and basically everything that Laura just mentioned. However, I do also remember that there might be ethical issues with using some of these tools and technologies, because you can't have 100% control of the data that's online, right? So Chase, let us know about this stuff. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of these predicaments and how to protect yourself and your clients?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how I might think we can turn some of those predicaments and our duty to follow our ethical rules, maybe into an opportunity and a framework that we can, use to innovate in our practices. Before we get started, I'll kind of give you a little bit of my background. Again, my name is Chase Hertel. I'm the Deputy Director and Counsel for the ABA's Center for Innovation. I work with attorneys, legal aid organizations, all sorts of legal industry stakeholders to help them understand sort of the state of legal innovation and how they can do things differently to add value and really streamline things for their clients. But I have to give you my standard ABA disclaimer before we really dig in here. One, I work for the ABA. I cannot speak for the ABA. Only the ABA president can do that. I'm really talking to you today in a personal capacity and as a representative of the Center for Innovation. Tracy, if we could move to the next slide. Thank you. So I posed this question and I kind of teased it a little bit in the beginning, and I'll pose it now. Are the rules, right, that we're supposed to follow as attorneys, right, a restriction, or are they a framework to help us guide legal innovation? And Laura touched on really kind of the basics of all innovation, right? To do innovation well, you've got to know your people, you've got to know your process, and you've got to know your technology, right? Really, if you don't dig in with your stakeholders and the people that are working with you and you're working for, and you don't understand the process that they're going through, and you don't understand the tools that are at play, you're almost always going to get a garbage in, garbage out scenario. It's the last thing we want to do when we're trying to better serve our clients and innovate, one in a pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic. Another thing I'd really like to touch on is Laura laid out a great example of the tools that she's using in her practice every day, and I think it's worth noting that the tools that she's using are actually relatively simple. At the Center for Innovation, we are not folks running around saying that we should be using the most bleeding edge artificial intelligence or blockchain technologies. If you're familiar, we're really focused on sort of pushing an agenda that says master what you have on your shelf, use what you already have available to you. That is going to lead to the most impactful innovations that help serve your clients and help them access the legal services that they need. So really, I think we have 3 ethical rules that we need to consider, among others. And I'm not an ethics attorney, but these are the ones that are most on point when we're talking about legal innovation. And I'm going to talk about the model rules. I'd encourage you to get really familiar with your local rule. But these are really what I think apply. One, we've got the model rule 1.1, which deals with attorney competence. We've got rule 1.6, which is our duty of to keep our clients' information confidential. And then we've really got rule 5.3, which involves our responsibility for folks that are not lawyers that we are working with, and that also includes technology vendors and companies that we might be working with. So let's start to unpack some of this a little bit. Tracy, if we could move to the next slide. I don't want to turn this into an ethics presentation. We've all gone through this in law school. I'm sorry I have the text of the rules up here on the screen, but what I really want to point out here with respect to rule 1.1 is that 37 states have adopted comment 8 to the rule. So we all know that we have to provide competent representation, and that requires a legal knowledge, skill, and thoroughness and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation that we're undertaking. But I really want to emphasize comment 8 here. And it says, a lawyer should keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. Laura and her team are clearly probably balancing this every day. They're deciding what tools they need to use so that they can better serve their clients, but they're also weighing the risks, right, associated with, maybe using something new that they've never tried out before, right? So I'm sure all of you are doing this in your practice every day. But I think this is a key component to how we can innovate in the legal industry, but also keep our ethical duties in mind. So if we can move to the next slide, we've got obviously our model rule 1.6. It's our duty of confidentiality. We're not supposed to reveal information relating to our clients. We are all supposed to be professional secret keepers. But I want to point something out. In 1.6 little c, a lawyer is supposed to take reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of or unauthorized access to information relating to the representation of a client. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, great. Reasonableness has just reared its head. This is a story of my life as a lawyer. What does reasonableness need? I need to know. Well, I'll help you out. If we can move to the next, we'll talk about it. Again, in the comments, I love the comments of the rules of professional responsibility. They provide me with tons of guidance when I'm talking to folks on these issues. And the major portion of this comment here is the unauthorized, and it's comment 18, the unauthorized access to or the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of information relating to the representation of clients does not constitute a violation of paragraph C if the lawyer has made reasonable efforts to prevent the access or disclosure. All right, so let's figure out let's really figure out what reasonableness needs. If we can go to the next slide, I'll show you. So the factors to be considered in determining if the efforts you've taken to protect your client's information, whether it be through a new technology or a process, really are fairly simple. You've really got to take into account the sensitivity of the information. Laura, I'm sure you're doing that every day. Silvia, I'm sure you are too. It really, to unpack this a little bit more, it's just, would my client want someone else to know about this? And how am I going to transmit this information to folks that are necessary to the representation? Just take that into account. The likelihood of disclosure if additional safeguards are not employed. So you're really just balancing. Should I send this in an email? Should I send this in a text? Right? Take that into account. Also, what's the cost, right? Whenever you're dealing with these types of if you're going to deploy technology to do this kind of work, right, or to help your clients, you've got to always kind of be weighing security and usability, right? The more secure, the likely more expensive, but the less usable that piece of technology is probably going to be for your clients and maybe even for you. The other thing is just how difficult is it for you to implement safeguards, and then the extent to which the safeguards adversely affect the lawyer's ability to represent clients. So I think this with these comments, I think it's better to get an understanding. It's easier to get an understanding of what's reasonable with respect to competence and technology and implementing technology into your practice.
Now, Chase, if I can ask a
Shoot.
question, when either attorneys or perhaps even the employee that works at the law firm who's more well versed with technology, when they're looking to purchase a certain tool or purchase a
Mm-hmm.
certain software, are there any keywords they should be looking to? Like, for instance, end-to-end encryption.
Yeah.
If I don't get that, does that mean I'm not using reasonable efforts?
No. So the I was going to get into that a little bit later, but I'm glad you posed the
I
question
jumped
now,
the gun.
Sylvia. Oh, it's totally fine. When you're talking about end-to-end encryption, it essentially means that no one but the end user can access that information. It's not unreasonable, though, for you to be using a different layer, a different security type, right, with your clients, if a platform does not provide end-to-end encryption. You're making a reasonable effort to secure that information. And I think the best way to really describe why that is, why this rule kind of has an amorphous scope, is that when you send a file in the mail, or you're sending your pleadings to court, right? There is an inherent risk that that envelope might get ripped open and somebody might read something that they're not supposed to. You can't prevent the impossible, or you can't be expected to, or you really can't prevent every single occurrence from happening, is what I'm trying to say. So does that make sense to you, Sylvia?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, if we can go to the next one, I'll start unpacking 5.4, and Sylvia, you started to touch on that, or 5.3. I thought you were going to go there. We're always working with folks, that may not necessarily be lawyers, whether it be support staff, vendors, etc. And we're responsible for the the non-lawyers that we're working with, right? So a big part of this rule, I'd really focus on here. I won't read it to you, but it's comment 3, that basically the bolded portion there says a lawyer must take reasonable efforts to ensure that the services are provided in a manner that is compatible with the lawyer's professional obligations. So if you're going to use technology like a document automation tool that sucks in client data to produce documents, you've got to make sure that that platform's secure and keeps that information safe, right? If you're going to use a cloud-based storage case management system, right? Same rules apply. You've really got to know the people and the platforms that you're working with, right? But they can also, these rules can also serve as a guide to help us know where we can innovate and where we might want to, consider otherwise. Can we move to the next slide? All right. So when managing a person who is not a lawyer or a vendor, what's a lawyer's obligation? Comment 3 continued. You can always find them in the comments. The extent of this obligation will obviously depend on the circumstances, including the education experience of the non-lawyer, the nature of the services involved, the terms or any arrangements concerning the protection of client information, and the legal and ethical environments of the jurisdictions in which the services will be performed, particularly with regard to confidentiality. So we've got, I think, a good sense based on that comment of what our obligations are when we're managing technology vendors and other non-lawyers. And I'm going to bring in kind of my third prong. If we could move to the next slide, really how to innovate ethically is this is, in my mind, where I think all of these rules intersect, right? You've got people, right? Well, we just talked about people in Rule 5.3. You've got process. Well, confidentiality is a part of our process as attorneys, right? That's Rule 1.6. And we've got technology competence and our duty to be competent attorneys in Rule 1.1. And really what that all means is if we keep our eyes on these rules, right, I think we can innovate ethically, right? So back to the people, process, technology mantra that we follow at the center, and I think all good legal innovation projects start with people. Connect with all your stakeholders involved, including vendors and people who are not lawyers, right? Know what they're doing, know what they're up to, and why. Know their process, right? Take reasonable steps to ensure confidentiality, ensure that we're running a good process, and that means, you know, knowing current processes well enough to identify where technology can help. And then with Rule 1.1, technology competence, right? Knowing where technology tools can be implemented to help clients, and also balancing that with knowing where certain technology tools, you know, might put client information at risk.
And Chase, I apologize to jump back in. So
Yeah.
to tie back into what I was trying to say is I ended up coming up with this really super efficient kind of remote estate planning clinic that, you know, I was able to get really good forms. Like, for example, there was a template, like a questionnaire that seniors were getting sent before me, but I saw that it was just really cumbersome. People weren't filling it out. It was too long. And
Right.
I found that people fill in charts a lot easier and it was much more complete. So I put it in simple language. I took out the legalese. I made it much shorter. And then I was getting much better responses. So that way I could have better forms, and that way the meetings that we had would be much shorter because the prep was just that much better. I was working with the senior centers to hear what their social workers were hearing, training their staff about what I could do. And so really it was all of these three things to get a super efficient, highly effective estate planning remote process, which was just one part of my practice, but it really did tie in all of these things together.
Thanks, Laura. Great example of you know, putting these principles to work.
Nice. So what I'm learning is stay on top of your stuff, everybody, especially when you're integrating technology and innovation into your practice. Use reasonable efforts, as Chase had mentioned, and make sure you're competent in the technology and innovation that you're using, which makes sense to me. And when the knowledge isn't within yourself or within your firm, then seek it out. Okay, make sure to seek it out.
Yeah, and if I could, Sylvia, just add, if you need help, reach out to me at the Center for Innovation. Happy to schedule phone calls with folks one-on-one. Well, you know, you can, I can give folks my email if they're interested.
And Chase, you can even put it in the chat function if you want.
Oh,
to
yeah,
do
I
that.
can do that.
Yeah.
Let's be innovative.
Right. So now this actually brings us to the next panelist. So Daniel Elliott. Dan, for as long as I've known you, you've always been seeking answers out and you've always been thinking 10 steps ahead. So how do we make sure to keep the ball rolling on what we've learned so far and the investments we've made during COVID and the new skills we've acquired? You know, how do we make sure that, you know, they're not all lost after, quote unquote, society gets back to normal?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. Are we going to do the poll now? My screen has like a little circle thing loading. There we go. So here's a poll. Basically, which of the following best describes you and your firm's metrics capabilities? To give a bit of background on each of these, it kind of goes in a hierarchy from the top to the bottom. Is basically the sophistication of the information that you're collecting and reporting out on. I hope that maybe gets a bit of information. But so I'll get to that in a second. And actually kind of building off of what Chase said, I'm technically a non-lawyer. So you're all responsible for me. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But I went to law school with Chase and Silvia at Michigan State and got my MBA as well. And I kind of, with that in mind, I wanted to say there's an old adage, which you may have heard, that, if you don't mind blood, you go to med school. If you like numbers, you go to business school. And if you like words, you go to law school. So kind of, there we go. Okay, so the poll results kind of what I'm expecting with most people being at the undefined scope section. I'll get to those in a second, and kind of with that in mind, the most difficult thing I would say to get innovation to stick after COVID, or even once COVID is passed, is that measure it so that you can show value to the people who are responsible for making sure it sticks, right? So, and kind of one of the most difficult things to do for that is, you lawyers are the best situated to know if something is helpful. However, the way most people measure something, the value or the usefulness of something, is using numbers. So it's kind of a disconnect in those two worlds. So I would say kind of you're naturally at a somewhat of a disadvantage, but kind of learning this is not too difficult. So how do you bridge that gap? I'd say there are three main things, and kind of three main a framework would be first. This is another old adage: don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Second, set a benchmark, and third, set a goal after you've set that benchmark. So I'm going to use a non-legal example to briefly kind of portray this mentality. And actually, I'll get to that question in a second. Non-legal example. We worked, actually, and this was based off of work from Chase and the Center for Innovation. There was a resolution 115 passed in February down at Austin at ABA midyear. After it passed the YLD, Chase and I went to lunch at a Mexican restaurant, very, very good. And I recommend it to everybody. And so kind of with that having passed, and I set a new goal for myself, which was basically a weight loss goal. I weighed about 188 pounds, not for TMI right there, but so I set a benchmark, right? This was my benchmark. My goal was to lose 17 pounds by the time I went on vacation to the Virgin Islands in April, which obviously did not happen because of COVID, the world lockdown. So what I did was, after that day, I started measuring. I started weighing myself every day. I wrote it down, most importantly, because if you don't write something down, your goal is going to constantly change, right? Oh, this is okay. I can do this. I can do that kind of thing. Now, one distinction that needs to be made is the difference between measuring something and having a metric. Measuring something is good and perfect, but if you don't have a goal, then you're just measuring something to measure something. So to make sure that when you have that undefined scope, the 56% of you who have that undefined kind of set of metrics, is to make sure that you do have an end goal in mind, because you need to be working towards something, otherwise spinning wheels. So kind of to wrap that up, I pressed on. I kept weighing myself. COVID happened. I was within 5 pounds of my weight goal, and then COVID, and I was like, great. So that added an extra month kind of thing. I eventually hit my goal May 23rd, and I ate way too much food after that, and we'll never do that again. But that's kind of a non-legal example of how a very simple example of how you set a goal after you create a benchmark, and not letting perfect be the enemy of good by just trying to reach for better kind of thing. So what I want to do now is if anybody in the chat, just add anything that you kind of want to achieve. Thank you. Add anything that you want to achieve from your legal business kind of perspective. What do you want to measure? What do you want to achieve? And that kind of thing. And this is an example Silvia, Chase, and Laura and I have all discussed some at a level is, e-signatures. Laura had, she travels to, or now no longer travels to a court, because she can e-file something and sign something, which saves her a number of days, a number of hours, a number of just gas dollars, and being able to e-sign rather than wet signature. So any other thoughts?
Which I didn't even talk about now. That's the new normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So feel free to add those to your chat. We can kind of talk through those, the main kind of as we start to get to the Q&A session of today. But I'll kind of wrap up as those are added. Because now, as you saw that, that's typically called a maturity model, the quiz or the poll that you just took, because it's a hierarchy of how you evolve from one state to the next, to the next, to the next. And I'll tell you that my own personal story is evolving because I hit that weight goal, and now my goal is single-digit body fat, which is insanely difficult to do. But luckily, I have a scale that measures all of that. So it measures that, and my kind of end goal would be to hit the fourth point on that maturity model, which is automated reporting. So if I can get my scale to send my weight and my body fat to my phone, then I'm basically just have to remember to eat healthy and to weigh myself every day, which kind of mirrors a mentality to loop it back to legal. My current company, Elevate Services, the GC there, Steve Harmon, he used to work at Cisco and is now at Elevate. He said that basically he'll be facing a problem. He'll be going at a problem. He'll solve it because he's measured it. He's figured out how to control it. And then once he solves it, he's like, okay, now I'm going to go start looking for another problem, because there are problems everywhere throughout any organization, whatever you're doing. There's always something to fix. But you want to make sure that that thing is still being measured. So in case it flares up again, you can go back right to where your measure was and try to control it again. So with that, I'll shift back to Silvia. Any Q&A, anything? Thank you all.
Sylvia, do you mind if I actually jump in with another kind of making it example?
Yeah,
statewide?
Go for it.
Again, I'm really proud of a lot of stuff that Michigan is doing, and this crisis has sort of highlighted some various needs. So unemployment obviously has been huge, and Steve Gray, the director of Michigan Unemployment Agency, is a former legal aid attorney, and he only started in the job about a year ago, and they've made a lot of changes to try and upgrade their system even before COVID hit. They were trying to make it more user-friendly, get out all the bugs, but then there was this amazing, not amazing, but really terrible and overwhelming demand on that system. And so even though that was really hard, they processed a lot really quickly, and it was like user testing on steroids because of, so they were able in a short period of time to really get their system and their process so much further along than they would have without this crisis. And so that in the long run is something that's going to be great. Also, because of the crisis, we had a lot of executive orders. At this point, Michigan has over 100 executive orders. So it would do things like suspend certain rules. So a lot of the kind of the red tape and a lot of these kind of barriers to people getting the benefits that they were entitled to were temporarily removed. And so I think there are some of those barriers that are going to be removed permanently because of this crisis. You know, there's been, it's been shown that they really were barriers. I think the statistic was something like for every, I think it was only 26% of people in Michigan who qualified for unemployment benefits were actually getting them pre-COVID. So maybe some of these temporary changes are going to stick long term. Another example of long-term sticking is, I mentioned that now remote notarization is something that's happening in Michigan. That's another executive order. I can't go see my senior clients. I can't do powers of attorney without a notary. So there's this executive order that says we can do remote notarization. So you need the video, the two-way communication, and that's something that I think, I'm fingers crossed, is going to stick long-term. Another thing that's hopefully going to stick long-term, actually it has, is, you know, we're going to have this massive eviction crisis. Right now, Michigan is under an eviction moratorium until June 30th. When it opens back up again, there's going to be so many people who have been hit so hard economically that are going to be facing evictions. So our state court administrator recently worked with the governor's office and legal aid partners and Department of Health and Human Services and all the other key stakeholders. So you've got your people, your process, and your tools, and they created a new tool. They created a new state court form and procedure for basically trying to avoid evictions if it's about the money. So we're getting CARES Act federal dollars, we're incorporating that into eviction diversion programs around the state, and then we're creating new forms like a conditional dismissal. The conditional dismissal form now is a clear way and tool that landlords and tenants can use, that if it's really just about the money, and we're creating systems to help them lock into the dollars that can help them get over this hardship, and then they turn in this form and the money gets paid, and then there's no eviction on that person's record, and so they're eliminating these other barriers. So those are just a few examples of some innovations in kind of our legal process on more of a statewide level that might stick long term. And on a personal level, I'm so much more efficient at home. I don't have coworkers interrupting me all the time. I love that I can just work several hours at 8 o'clock at night if I feel like it, or on a Sunday, and I get credit for it. So I really hope that the flexibility sticks just as a personal employee. And I did see that I had a question in the chat. Is it okay if I answer that real quick?
Go for it. And
Okay,
there
so
is
the
another
question
one
was
that I'll read.
about timekeeping. I had mentioned that I take screenshots on my phone. So like I just, my phone has the time, and so I take a screenshot of the time when I'm transitioning from one activity to the next. And then later on, when I actually have time to enter my time, I'm going into my case management system, which for legal aid attorneys in Michigan, that's called PICA. I don't really know how other case management systems work, but in mine, everything that I do, it's a time entry, it's a note entry. So I'm giving all the details about what I did during that meeting, the advice that I gave, the documents that I generated, and it says, the start time and, how much time that was. Was that a 0.9? Was it a 0.1? And so I'm making sure at the end of the day that I go back in and I put in my time log. And in this, our case management system, we're required by the Legal Services Organization to track all this different data. So we could run massive reports like how many veterans am I seeing, how many people that are under this poverty level, how many cases am I closing in a month, and we're really underutilizing, I think, the data that we are collecting. But so yeah, that's just my low-tech way of just taking that screenshot so that I don't forget what I did. I also go back through my phone log and also the emails that I sent if I'm trying to be like, where did my day go?
Thanks, Laura. So now, just to let everybody know as well, Laura actually gave me that piece of advice like a few years ago when I was first starting out with the whole billing situation, and I've used it. It may be low tech, but I have used it and I have benefited from it myself. And thank you for the examples that you gave as well prior to that, because that is the epitome of innovation out of necessity. There are so many things as attorneys, as human beings, just regular people, that we want to do, or maybe we're hesitant about, but we just don't move forward and adapt those until there's a crisis, right? But we want to be able to stay ahead of that ball sometimes. Now, over at the next slide, you'll see that we want you to be the change that you see, or be the change that you want to see in the world. I don't know how many people out there were Dr. Seuss folks growing up. I know I was, and there's this cute little quote from the Lorax, I think, and it says that unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And that goes in line with what you see up on your screen right now. So what we want you to do is go ahead and talk to us in the chat function. Tell us what it is that you want to see continuing to change in the legal industry or in the adjoining industries, and what it is that you liked, didn't like, and any other questions you have as well. I think we have about 7 minutes. I did get a question while everybody was talking that I'd love to see addressed. Give me 1 second and I can pull it out. Okay, so Sarah Arredondo says, that she's a certified court reporter, and due to COVID, she set up her home office remotely, and she wants to know for attorneys, and please, if anybody has an answer that's out there, let us know in the chat as well. But for attorneys, what tools and methods are most helpful for you to be able to work with interpreters? If anybody on the panel has an answer for Sarah or thoughts. Laura, have you ever worked with interpreters in your line of work?
Yes, I have. So at Legal Aid, we use a language line. So it's a bit cumbersome, but it works. So basically somebody calls in and you have to just figure out that they're not speaking English, and then I call in, and then it takes a couple minutes, so hopefully they stay on the line, and then I get a real-time interpreter and I'm able to speak with my clients that way. So in Legal Aid, we have to provide access with non-English speakers. So I have used that and it works.
Okay, nice.
And also each court has you know, somebody who's designated to deal with interpreters. So if we're going to court, I have to coordinate with that designated person to make sure that there is an interpreter that's available at the courthouse for the actual hearing. And they take that very seriously and are very cooperative.
Great, thank you. All right, well, in that case, if anybody else has anything to add, please. Chase, Dan, Laura, we've got like 5 minutes left. Oh, and we do have another question. What legal technologies / software do you suggest that I learn to be in demand as an estate planning paralegal? And that's from Adrian Nash.
So I would say if you're not already using Adobe Acrobat Pro, that would be kind of the #1 thing. So you're dealing with documents, and one good thing about Pro, a few things, you can create fillable forms. So if you have tech-savvy people that you can email your estate planning questionnaire to, and then they can just type in the answers, that way you don't have to deal with their terrible handwriting, which often happens. And, you know, I think a pipe dream for me is that I could integrate it so then the answers, maybe they were part of a Google form and then they populate into the document, which that's a little too advanced for me, so I don't have to retype stuff. But Adobe Acrobat Pro allows you to create fillable PDF forms, which is great. And also you can just, if you're collecting documents, oftentimes your clients are giving them to you and they're scanned and they're sideways and it's one page at a time, and you have to convert it from a JPEG to an actual PDF, and you have to merge the documents. So with Adobe Acrobat Pro, you can combine documents, it's easy to reformat them. So I use Adobe Acrobat Pro all the time. And just, you know, when you're in litigation, also being able to mark up your exhibits and put, you know, the exhibit stamps on them, and to be able to do Bates numbering is really helpful, to be able to redact documents on exhibits that you're using, and all of that you can do with Adobe Acrobat Pro. So that's a good one. And then I just use Word, you know, in my estate planning. So my really low-tech estate planning is I had my paper questionnaire that I spent so much time on, you know, this is the information that I need. And then I got it back and I physically typed it into a Word document, but I created a key on my estate planning Word tool where I would just search and replace. This is super low tech. So I had client written everywhere where the client's name is, client's address, personal representative 1, backup personal representative. And so I would highlight that term, and then I would replace it with that person's name or that person's address. And then once I search and replace, you know, that one page of terms, then I had my whole estate planning packet that was complete. You know, of course you still have to go through and check it, but that was my low-tech way of not having to go through and retype everything. And it really did save me a lot of time. So you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be this master tech person, and you can find little ways to be more efficient and improve your process.
Efficiency, I love it. So that's all the time that we have today, actually. And I absolutely love this conversation. I hope everybody out there did as well. Thank you to our panelists, Chase, Laura, and Dan. Thank you to everybody for hopping on and for joining the YLD in its first virtual conference. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and the rest of the presentations. I hope to see you in person soon. So other than that, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.